This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everyone. I am Dewana Almatine, the new Director of Grants and Contracts with the Family League. We welcome you to our first ever virtual FY21 Annual Funded Partners Week. We are very excited about your participation in our new virtual meeting structure, which will provide you with a wealth of information and tools to ensure that our partnership and services are delivered to maximum capacity, continuing to allow us to provide the critical resources and services to the children, youth, adults, families, and communities of Baltimore. We will be emphasizing throughout this week our core organizational objectives during this training, which are to, number one, strengthen organizations and communities like yourselves, influence systems through our public policy advocacy work, and also lead collaborative partnerships to better serve the community which you have been brought on board to do. Our programs, data and evaluation, impact, professional development, and information technology groups will be joining us over the next several days to provide you with information-packed presentations that you will find extremely useful. First, I wanted to share with you an important highlight. Our funded partnerships team structure has changed over the past several months. Our department will no longer be known as funded partnerships. Our department now falls under and is combined with our dynamic finance team, which is led by Kiana Thompson. We are now known as the Grants and Contracts team. This restructuring allows us to better serve the contracting and financial needs of our organization and our partners. However, the email address that many of you are familiar with, which is fundedpartnerships@familylead.org, will remain the same. So please feel free to continue to use that address to request assistance and information in any areas that you may need. Today's agenda of presentations will include a welcome and remarks from our phenomenal President and CEO, Demaune Millard, followed by presentations by our communications team, grants and contracts team, finance team, and also our legal consultant, who will be providing you with critical details about the importance of background checks and the work that you do. There will also be an opportunity for question and answers at the end of the session today. So we are asking that you provide your questions through the chat function of our session, and we will answer them in the order that they are received at that time. Lastly, I wanted to advise everyone that this virtual meeting is being recorded and will be made available to each of you via email by close of business today. All sessions will also be made available on our website on Friday, September 25th. As stated earlier, we are quite excited about this week and the sessions that we have in store for you to gain insight and training for a wonderful year of collaborative partnerships and making a difference in the communities of Baltimore City. I'll now turn it over to Demaune. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Dewana. Really appreciate it. So good to see you all. Hopefully, you and your family members are doing well and are healthy during this challenging time of COVID-19. I just want to extend our greetings on behalf of the organization, as well as our board chair, Reverend Dr. Terrace King. This year, obviously, has been an extremely tough year. And also to the degree that with some of the untimely losses that we've had of some pivotal giants within our community and our nation, the most recent news being with U.S. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And if you wouldn't mind just joining me in just a brief moment of silence just to honor her legacy, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. So just in terms of the work that we're embarking upon, and I want to thank Dewana again. We have such a phenomenal team at Family League that heads up our funded partners and also the grants and contracts work. I want to acknowledge Jillian as well as Clifton, who are extremely extraordinary staff members who keeps the cogs going when it comes to the work. As it relates to some of the organizational and structural shifts that have been made that Dewana just alluded to, is really just from a standpoint in making sure that we're able to offer the best customer service to you, our partners, and for all the great work that you do. We recognize that sometimes we don't necessarily always hit the mark, but we always make sure that we try to guarantee the effort to be as responsive in meeting the needs just in terms of supporting your work on a day-to-day basis. As Dewana also mentioned, with Kiana Thompson now heading up our total finance as well as the grants and contracts team, is really just to eliminate a lot of the silos that you probably have experienced and some of the things that we also have had to address internally. And so really it's just from a standpoint of having a much more streamlined and efficient approach when it comes to grants and contracting, as well as the budgeting and fiscal administration of your respective contracts. Next, I want to take time just to express the work that we've been doing specifically as it relates to Family League Transformation 2020. That has been our strategic planning process that we embarked upon since January of this year. We've been partnering with Maryland nonprofits who've been our facilitators as a part of that process. Really, we've been focusing our work in terms of lifting up 3 to 4 main pillars of our work, looking at our organizational structure, as well as our organizational culture. How do we show up within the community? And then also, how do we leverage the grants and funds that we receive as it relates to the public sector, and really harnessing that to be much more of an innovative approach in getting more ongoing non-designated funds, mainly from the private sector, as well as other philanthropic and foundational entities. A lot of this work is now really based on the foundation with our community health needs assessment, and that was conducted by Morgan State University School of Community Health and Policy, which basically did a scan in terms of the 0 to career continuum, starting everything in terms of with maternal and child health home visiting, and looking at the communities within our city, and recognizing those that have been underserved and marginalized, oppressed, and unfortunately met with a disservice and disinvestment from various resources and services. So we're really excited about how, one, we can bridge some of those gaps when it comes to equity. And that's essentially what the work that Morgan had did in terms of the research for this project. And so there were a number of focus group conversations that were held throughout the city that consisted of not only East and West Baltimore, but also South Baltimore as well, and looking at some of the various divisions in the institutional structures and barriers that we have been experiencing for quite some time. So this is really going to be serving as our North Star to guide our strategic planning moving forward. And you'll hear more details about that before the year ends. You can go find the full report in the Community Needs Assessment on our website at Transformation 2020, right on the link with familyleague.org. Next, I just want to also highlight a few new projects that we have that's underway. We are excited about a new partnership with Total Healthcare, which is our local, one of our local federally qualified health centers. And really, it's just in terms of getting the message out in terms of the challenges that we're dealing with COVID-19 and the pandemic. Really, it's to help engage some of the populations that are hard to reach, mainly in the areas of homeless youth, and considered to be some vulnerable populations, and really making sure that we're making the connections when it comes to testing and screening, and also supports for those populations moving forward. So you'll hear more about that and the rollout of that program and that project within the next month or so. And lastly, we're really excited about another project with Sesame Street. Yes, was accurate. Sesame Street. It's called Sesame Street in the Community. They have really focused in terms of providing a level of support for families who are dealing with really parental addiction, as well as issues in terms of trauma experiences. We're really looking at rolling that out. October 6th will be the official launch date, in which there will be a digital family town hall workshop. And so we look forward to getting that to you as well. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate you all having me here. I'm extremely excited about our great team that we have to debunk and demystify some of the things as it relates to the processes of Family League. So please soak up as much information as you possibly can, like a sponge. And if there's anything that we can do to be a support, please don't hesitate to let us know. Thank you for your time, and God bless you, and God bless your family members, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks, Dewana.
Thank you. Next, we'll have a communications overview by Rachel Graham.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for truly an unprecedented step in the way that we connect with our stakeholders and funded partners here at Family League. My name is Rachel Graham, and I serve as the Communications Director for Family League of Baltimore, part of a two-person powerhouse team, including our newly appointed Digital Media and Design Coordinator, Alexandra Leonard. So today we're going to talk about who we are and what we do here with the communications team at Family League of Baltimore. We are essentially responsible for management of Family League's brand. That includes how you talk about Family League, as well as things that you traditionally would associate with brand management, including the logo, social media presence, and website, as well as media relations. We position ourselves as a thought partner for all of the teams internally with Family League in effectively communicating their work, achieving team goals, and making sure that team outward-facing material is in alignment with organizational brand. And a lot of that support transfers over to our funded partners as frequently as we are able to do so. Again, we manage the internal and external communications functions, including the website and social media. So a few of the externally facing tools that you should know that we have available, both to communicate with you, as well as to communicate internally and offer opportunities to highlight and showcase the things that are going on with our partners. We have our community schools and out of school time resources and reminders newsletter that typically comes out the first Tuesday in each month, unless there is a holiday or something along those lines, and then we have to push it back. We have a public policy newsletter that we kick up in January. Typically, it starts the first Wednesday in January, which is right before session starts, and it runs pretty much through May. with a special edition coming out the day after Sine Die. We also have a food access newsletter that we will be relaunching as we are moving through this COVID space. It is typically a printed newsletter, but because of restrictions, we are currently trying to work through how we can deliver that electronically. We provide a funded partnerships newsletter that lets you know of funding opportunities that are available. We have the Family League's quarterly newsletter that gives you kind of a one-stop shop around the things that are going on with Family League. And as we move through strategic planning, it will also serve as a vehicle to keep you up to date and keep us kind of accountable on where we are with some of the goals that we outline within the strategic plan. And then finally, we have our funded partnerships newsletter, our professional development newsletter, which will keep you up to date on various trainings that are available to you. Just to quickly go through our digital presence, familyleague.org is our website. We encourage you to go around, play in that space, because it is really a useful tool in keeping you connected and up to date on Family League, some of the offerings, and if you just have general questions about the organization. Demaune mentioned Transformation 2020, and this is basically the space where we will keep in touch with our stakeholders regarding our strategic plan. It is currently up and functional. You can access it two ways, either by visiting transformation2020.familyleague.org, or you can go to familyleague.org/transformation-2020. And also there is a slider directly on the homepage that will take you there as well. Currently in that space, we have available the community health needs assessment that Demaune referenced. You can go and visit transformation2020.familyleague.org, and right there on that page there's a link directly to the community health needs assessment, should you choose to download it and kind of look at kind of the feedback that we have received from community and the recommendations. An awesome document that we worked together with Morgan State University to develop. We are active on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. These are the handles for our Facebook page and Instagram page, as well as LinkedIn and Twitter. So just to briefly talk about our logo, as funded partners, you do have the right to ask us to utilize our logo if you're going to co-brand any work that is associated with the grants that you receive from the organization. If you look to your upper left, you will see our standard logo, which is our color logo. You can actually request that logo by reaching out to Alexandria Leonard at aleonard@familyleague.org. The logo to the right is a logo that we typically don't use except for if we are developing, as you would call it, swag, or if you have a black and white promotional piece that you want to use, we would provide you with one of those. All of these logos are provided as transparencies, which means that you can lay them right on top of your items and don't have to worry about having a white background or anything like that. What you'll see on the lower left-hand side is how the logo should not look. That is a distorted logo, and we ask that you, if you have challenges with utilizing the logo, just reach out to us at communications@familyleague.org, and we're more than happy to help you navigate that process. Again, I talked about the logo formats. We have JPEG and PNG. PNG is a transparent file that you can see to the left there, and then the JPEG has the white background if needed. So this is a very important part of our branding. We really try to reemphasize this as often as we possibly can. And I know that it's because Family League was known as the Family League branding wise for many, many years, it's a challenging transition, but there is no the. We are referred to as Family League or Family League of Baltimore. If you're looking to use a possessive sense, it should be Family Leagues with an apostrophe S. So let's talk about how best to engage the communications team to support you. Early is best. Just to give you some context, we support about 8 different departments within the organization, managing internal communications as well as organizational communications projects. We would ask that you connect with your respective program managers and contacts as early as possible if you would like to leverage Family League support in promoting you or your stories or any events or activities that are coming up in the future. The easiest way to do this is to tag us in your social media posts. We are embarking on a bit of a shift in how we promote our partners. We are now utilizing the stories function within Facebook and Instagram, which allows us the space to promote both our organization as well as the work of our partners. And so if you tag us in your social media posts, that will allow us, if we don't know in advance, that will allow us to pick up your post and then share those to our audience via the stories function on Facebook or Instagram. As always, give us a heads up on any events that you would like us to help you promote. Ideally, if you give us about 2 to 3 weeks notice so that we can factor those into our overarching social media calendar, that is what is best. Most importantly, we ask that you share your story. We have amazing partners that are doing amazing work within the city of Baltimore. And the beauty of social media is that there is no in-between person like a news agency that kind of determines whether or not your story is worth being heard or shared with the advent of social media. And so we ask that you cultivate those stories, share those stories, and then we can help you amplify those by sharing those in our social media space. This is a bit important. Any media release that includes Family League should be submitted to us prior to being sent out so that we can provide approval. This is most important as it relates to city dollars, if you're receiving dollars from the city of Baltimore, because we need to send those through the city's communications team as well for approvals. And so that's why we ask for about a 24-hour to 48-hour turnaround time for response to any requests around media relations. That is like the absolute, how should I say this? That's the extreme. If you can get them to us even further in advance, that's most helpful because we can take the time to make sure that we're giving full attention to your work and to how we can best support you. And with that, I will turn it over to grants and contracts with Ms. Kiana Thompson.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rachel, so much. Next, we'll have a presentation from our grants and contracts team who will provide an overview to you on reporting, site visits, funding track, and other contract highlights. Our team consists of myself, the Director of Grants and Contracts, Ms. Jillian Hart, who is our Manager of Grants and Contracts, and Mr. Clifton Williams, our Senior Partnership Manager. As a result of our team restructuring that I highlighted with you earlier, we are actually actively recruiting for a contracts administrative position, and this individual will provide administrative support to the team in all aspects of our contracting efforts. I'll now turn it over to our Partnership Manager, Clifton Williams.
Good morning. Welcome to our meeting. I'll first talk about some of the initial documentation that's due for the contracts that were just issued. Some of these administrative documents, well, not some of them, all of them are necessary in order to get your first payments out. So there are 2 things that come into play here. We need to ensure that everything that you needed to submit to close out FY20 has been submitted and approved, and then these documents have to be accepted in order for those first advances to be paid. So it's your certificate of insurance. And I'll just mention that there have been a couple certificates already submitted, and I've noticed that some are expiring soon. So before they expire, you want to get us another certificate so you can stay in compliance. You also want to submit your certificates of good standing. You can find those on the Maryland State Department of Assessments and Taxation's website. The conflict of interest form, that form is embedded in the application and funding track, so you can extract that, complete it, and get it back to us. There's also the independently audited financial statement, or the Form 990. Now, you submit one or the other. If you have a grant that's $50,000 or greater, then you want to submit the audited financial statement. If it's less than $50,000, $49.99.99, you want to submit the Form 990. The staffing and criminal background check reports, that document is available to you in funding track, and it should be completed in all of those necessary spaces filled. If you're using a system to complete these documents that's outside of the school system, then you need to document that as well. Then there's a standard budget, which is due. Some of them are past due now for FY21, and then the scope of work, and that's that initial scope of work to sort of inform what you're going to be doing in this grant year. All of these documents have different, not the administrative documentation, that's all due on the same day, but they all have different due dates this year because of all the challenges we face with COVID-19. So please refer to funding track for these due dates. Next, please. Can I advance? Okay, these are the standard due dates, and if you notice, a lot of them are due on October 15th. The quarterly expense reports are still due on October 15th, but the RBAs have some varying due dates. So again, refer to the date that's published in funding track on the report. But the second quarter's reports are all going to go back to the standard schedule of January 15th, and then they'll follow that schedule throughout the end of the fiscal year. The monthly local hiring and employment reports, there are two parts to that. And this, some new partners have never seen this, and some of the continuing partners probably are wondering what happened in fiscal year 20. Well, they were not completed in fiscal year 20, but there's still a requirement for them to be completed. And I'll be sending that information out in the next week or two. So for fiscal year 20, you will be allowed to complete one form instead of the monthly form for each month. You'll be able to put all of that information on one form. So from July 1 of 19 through June 30th of 20 or September 30th of 20, you'll be able to include all of that information on one form for fiscal year 20. But fiscal year 21 will be returning to the monthly submissions. And again, that information will come out to you in the next week or two. And those local hiring, the monthly reports are due on the 5th of each month. And there's also an annual analysis, and that's just a one-time report for the fiscal year. So you'll get both of those at the start, and then the expectation is that every month following, you'll submit it by the 5th, the monthly local hiring report. Next, please. Okay, the informal site visits and the formal site visits, and we refer to them as the administrative site visits. We were able to conduct some informal site visits last year and some formal site visits, but they were interrupted again because of COVID. But the informal site visit is just to provide support and resources and gain an understanding of, as to, or give you an opportunity to discuss any challenges that you may have or support you may need. By the time we reach the formal site visits, the expectation is that we will come in then and we're actually conducting, it's basically an audit. And it's these documents and these procedures and policies that we'll be reviewing. Again, we were able to conduct some, but a lot of them did not get conducted. They were canceled, because of COVID. So hopefully this year we'll be able to get around and do some of do them all. Next, please. Okay, here are the local samples of the local hiring reports. And they're required for all of the contracts that we have with through Family League, that we issue through Family League to our partners. So all partners are required to complete these. These are the two documents. So the very first document, although you can't see it, that's the local hiring employment analysis report. That's the one that you'll fill out for fiscal year 21 one time. And then the other report is the monthly employment report, and that's where you'll report if you've hired new folks, if you utilize the city services to advertise for those positions that you've hired, and that sort of thing. Again, these forms will come to you with instructions, and you can reach out to me if you have questions about them. Next. I'll turn it over to Jillian now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jillian Harp. For some of you who previously had Veronica Owens as your partnership manager, I am now the partnership manager that's responsible for your portfolio. So for those of you I haven't met, it's nice to meet you over GoToMeeting. So I'm going to move forward the rest of the grants and contracts presentation. So this slide is talking about our grants management system, or our portal. It's called Funding Track. So on the slide, you can see the website, the URL of how to get to that system. So all of you all should have a username and a password in order to log into Funding Track. If you don't, your authorized official should email your partnership manager with your name, title, email address, phone number, and your designation. So whether you provide oversight, your program staff, or if you're a reviewer, and that will start the process of us getting you registered in Funding Track so you can access the grants management system. In the grants management system, that's where you'll do all of your reporting. If you're applying for any applications, if you're submitting updated information. So like Clifton was saying, if you have an updated certificate of insurance that you need to upload or something of that nature, you would do it in Funding Track. And a big thing about Funding Track is to always use it on Google Chrome. It works the best on that platform. Some of the other internet platforms, it may show up a little wonky. So we always suggest that you use Google Chrome in order to have the best experience with Funding Track. For technical support for Funding Track, this is the email address that you can send any of your inquiries to. So it's fundingtrack@familyleague.zendesk.com. So basically anything Funding Track related. If you forgot your username and password, if you didn't forget them, but you're just having trouble logging into the system, viewing something, if you have a question about submitting an application or report, or just anything Funding Track related, anything grants management system related, this is the email address that you should send your inquiry to. The background checks we wanted to touch on because we get a lot of questions about them every fiscal year. So I'm just going to go over them briefly here, but we also have Don Walsh from our legal advisors who will go over it more in depth later on in this presentation. But basically there is a report that Clifton mentioned that's called the Staffing Criminal Background Check Report. So to that report, you need to upload all of the names of the individuals and the dates that their last criminal background check was completed. And that's really for anyone working in your program as a subcontractor, a volunteer, or some other partner that's going to have contact with children. So it doesn't mean that, a lot of times we get the question of, if they're not paid through the Family League grant, do they still need a criminal background check? That information is uploaded onto that report? Yes. So it's not whether someone is paid by Family League funds or not. It's really the people that are interacting with your program, and if they will have any type of contact with children, those are the people that we need to have a record of their name and the last date of their criminal background check. The other piece of this is a part of our contract is that there's a record retention policy. So we do not require that you upload the criminal background checks to Funding Track, but we do require that you keep them for a period of time. So make sure that even if they're not uploaded to Funding Track, that you do have them on file, because that is a contract requirement. And then an additional policy is that all of our funded partners have a written policy on how they will respond to situations in which criminal activity is disclosed. So most people have some in their staffing orientation, some type of policy about disclosing criminal activity or criminal background check policy or something of that sort. So we just require that everyone has one of those. And the next slide, please. Okay, and confidentiality and releases. So Rachel touched on this before when she was going over our communications department at Family League, but these 3 bullets are kind of the 3 main things that we'd like you to know from the grants and contracts department about confidentiality and releases. So the first one is that confidential participant information that Family League asks for shall comply with safekeeping state and federal laws. So some of you may have to upload participant level information through trackers. So the process that you do that in, where the trackers have passwords and they're encrypted, that is what this is really talking about, making sure that if you are sharing confidential participant information, that it follows those safekeeping laws. And the other pieces of it are, the next 2 bullets are really about the media releases that Rachel was speaking to. So any participant info, including photos and videos, should not be shared with the third party without parental or guardian consent. So to make sure when you have participants enroll in your programs, we always suggest that on the front end that you get this parental and guardian consent about any photos and videos that you may take of their youth while they are in your program. And the final bullet that we really want to drive home is when issuing statements, press releases, or any publications associated with this grant, funded partners must obtain prior consent from Family League. So this is what Rachel was saying, where we have a minimum of a 48-hour turnaround to get those releases approved before you're able to utilize them, but really earlier is better. So the earliest that you can get us, what other statements or press releases, publications that you would like to publish, and we can get that to our communications team and have them review it and give a final approval. The more time that you give us, the better.
Okay, thank you so much, Jillian and Clifton. Just a friendly reminder that we are definitely requesting that if you have any questions, that you provide those questions to us through the chat function, and we'll be sure to answer them in the order that they are received. So definitely shoot away with the questions if you have any. Next, we'll have a presentation from our finance team, who will provide an overview on the roles in their departments, payments, budgets, and budget modifications. I'll now turn it over to Ms. Kiana Thompson. I'm sorry, I just realized that I was muted, so I will start over. We will be, for finance, we'll be discussing our department roles, the payments, and the budget modifications. We have 3 people in our finance department. We have Niselle Moses, our senior accountant. She reviews and approves budgets and expense reports, processes payments, and fields inquiries regarding payments. We also have our accounting manager, Keena Lee. She's responsible for invoicing all of our funders. And she also collects supporting documentation for our family recovery program, as well as the pre-K pilot programs. And myself, I review and approve budgets and budget modifications. I provide technical assistance that you may have with budgets, expense reports, and funding track. And I oversee the finance and grants and contracts department. And now I will turn it over to Nisel Moses, who will be discussing your payments.
I think I was muted. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I am Nisel Moses. As Kiana stated, all payments are issued within 30 days upon approval of all required reports for the quarter. Payment amounts are contingent on the expense report and the payment schedule in the contract. We issue payments via EFT only. Next slide. Your first 10% advance is issued when your award letter is signed. Your second 10% advance is issued when the contract is fully executed and initial reports are approved. The first quarterly payment cannot exceed 40% of the total award amount. The second quarterly payment cannot exceed 60% of the total award amount. Your third payment cannot exceed 80% of the total award amount, and your final payment cannot exceed 100% of the total award amount.
So for budget modifications, we'd like you to allow us 2 weeks to process those modifications. You should make a request for one if you're going to change your line item greater than 10%, and if funds are being allocated to a different category. So for instance, if you wanted to modify salaries between positions, you do not have to submit a budget modification because it is within the same line item. But let's say you anticipate underspending in your salaries, you can move that underspending amount to supplies, perhaps, program expenses. And then budget modifications must be submitted no later than 60 days from the end of your contract term. So typically, most of the contracts end on June 30th. So you should submit your budget modification request by April 30th. There are a few steps to the budget modifications. First, you want to access your expense report and funding track, and you hit the request modification budget. From there, you'll just provide a brief description of what you're changing. It does not have to be detailed. You can just say you want to move expenses between line items. I will determine if a budget modification is necessary based on what you submit. If the modification is necessary, a template will be assigned in funding track for you to complete and submit. A lot of people do miss this step, and you want to make sure that you completely fill out that template. All of the, excuse me, all of the line items of the budget must be entered whether or not you're making changes to the line items. So if your budget, your total budget is $50,000, you have to enter in $50,000 worth of expenses, whether or not you're changing the line. And then once you submit it, I'll review and approve the revised budget. And then the revised budget becomes your expense report for all of your subsequent expenses. And now I will turn it over to Don Walsh, our legal counsel.
Good morning. I just got to make sure I've got control. I think I've got control now. Thank you for this morning. Thank you for letting me come. I appreciate it on a Monday morning. This is probably a difficult thing to go through. Then you add to it that you're going to have an attorney talking, doesn't make it any easier. Add to it the topic that I'm going to talk about, and I understand it's a bit of a stressful morning for you. So I appreciate you bearing with me as we kind of go through this. My name is Don Walsh. I'm an attorney in Baltimore. I advise the Family League on a variety of different issues. I've been doing this for about 30 years now, advising individuals, businesses, nonprofits on a variety of different levels about all kinds of different issues that they have to encounter, trying to help them stay out of trouble, trying to make sure that everybody toes the path and does what they're supposed to in terms of making sure that they have successful business careers along the way. One thing that you'll have to understand about what I'm going to talk about, and one thing that you're going to have to understand in terms of how I advise my clients, is that basically I plan for the divorce. So you're going to hear me say that from time to time, and part of what we're going to talk about this morning is the idea that sort of planning for the divorce. And what that means is that everybody's in a honeymoon phase, everybody has the best of intentions at the beginning, but I'm here to try and make sure that people comply with things in a certain way so that if we ever need an exit strategy, if we ever need a way in which we can try and say that it's not my fault, we've done everything we were supposed to, and things happen, I'm here to try and help you for that. So that's what I mean by sort of trying to prepare for the divorce. One of the other things about all that is obviously the situation that we're talking about here with background checks and the consequences of all this is really focusing on liabilities. Every company has a tremendous amount of liabilities as a result of having employees and as a result of having volunteers and people working for them. We all need them. Every business has them. But the reality is there's a lot of things that can take place if they're not carefully watched, if not carefully trained, not carefully monitored, to make sure that you do the best that you can to help things as they go along. So what we're going to talk about this morning are background checks. And the first question that I always get is, Don, why do we really have to do this? And the, hang on, let me make sure I've got control here. So really the reason why Family League insists on this and the reason why everybody has to do it, because it's the law. The law requires that there be background checks be done of anybody who is working with youths in the state. There's a variety of different counties that have slowly started to implement this in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different stages, to make sure that those people who are working with children under the age of 18 are making sure that there's some check to try and protect children the best way that they can. The law requires that there be a national and a state criminal history check. It is absolutely required. Family League, as the local management board for the city, is required to make sure that all of its vendors are in compliance with that. So we have to go through this process, and I know that it may seem like a pain for a lot of companies, and it may seem like something that companies feel that they don't need. Nonprofits look at it and say, look, we're in the business of trying to make sure that we have people who want to help, and I don't want to dissuade those people, but at the end of the day, the big picture behind all of this is trying to make sure that we protect those people that we're trying to serve. And the people we're trying to serve and the people we're trying to protect are those children that you're putting so much effort and so much good works into trying to help them. So since the law is requiring this, it's not Family League, it's not unique to Family League. It is something that ultimately we all have to do to try and make sure that we get this done in an appropriate way. Family League as a local management board is required to make sure that all of its funded partners develop and comply with policies and procedures in these situations. It is not something that is just put in a contract and then they check out about it. It is something that's required. I know I've seen various presentations this morning. We've talked about how it's uploaded into funding tracks, how you have to keep track of the employees that you've done that for, the different volunteers that you've done the background checks for. And I know there's a variety of questions that have been asked, and I'm sure there will be others. Feel free to chime in. If I miss anything, make sure you put that in there to make sure that you have the right people covered in the process. The reality is for you to think about the liabilities and think about the reasons why it is that we do background checks and trying to make sure that what's the idea behind it. It's not hard to say that if a background check is not done appropriately. It's not hard to say that if somebody comes into the program that probably shouldn't be there, isn't the best person to make sure that they're checking up and dealing with children, that there are some significant liabilities that could occur. And I'm not even talking about monetary liabilities. There are a lot of things that can impact to children. We're all here in a lot of variety of ways to try and make sure that we can assist children. We can make sure we provide youth with a stable foundation and something to help them grow into great young adults. And obviously, there's a lot of things that can happen at this point in their lives if we're not careful that just create bigger problems than are necessary. So it's not even dollars at this point. What we're really talking about are lives and the significant impact that it's going to have down the road to other individuals. I'm trying to change it. It is not working. There we go. Fantastic. Thank you. So the reality is that at the end of the day, it makes sense to do this. I mean, it really does. This should be a no-brainer for most people to say that what we're talking about here is trying to protect children. I get it that our fiscal budgets are very important. I get it and understand the idea that everybody is pinching pennies where they can, and they're trying to make a decision as to whether that money that's spent on background checks would be better served by putting it into different programs or enhancements to the program that could help. But at the end of the day, this is a vital component because the consequences are so far and so reaching. There's been a variety of different statistics that are out there. This should be no secret to anybody at the end of the day. 96% of the children who've been abused are abused by somebody who knew who it was that was involved. The child knew who they were dealing with. The child was aware of the fact that the individual was somebody in their lives and was trusted. It was not a stranger to them. Because of that, this is something that we want to try and protect again because it is so simple to protect against, and it is something that we ultimately want to try and make sure that we can do to avoid any sort of those problems. Ooh, I think it jumped a slide. Can we go back one slide? Go back one more. Go back one more. There should be. All right, go back one more. Fantastic, thank you. So the reality is who. That's sort of where we've got to start with this whole thing. You got to start with who it is. And the way that we measure this is anybody who believes going to be coming in contact with the children, anybody who that may be. It could be employees, it could be volunteers, it could be interns, and it could be subcontractors. Subcontractors is somebody we're going to talk about in a second, having a very unique situation here in terms of what you should do and what you need to do. So don't let me forget subcontractors if I forget to mention about it. I get questions all the time about various positions and about whether this position, somebody working in administrative functions, somebody working who comes in on a weekly basis, or somebody who comes in on a daily basis, somebody who might have incidental contact only once a month with a child. Should they do a background check on them? And the reality is it's anybody who has contact. That is the only way that I can answer it. It's up to you to assess how much contact that individual is having. Is it possible that the individual that's involved could have contact with a child that could be unsupervised in some fashion? That's really what you want to test. And then you want to weigh that against the idea of, is the risk really worth it? Is the risk that this individual could come in, have contact with a child, and do something that's inappropriate, is it worth it at that point? Do you want that on your conscience, let alone on your insurance policy, that has happened under your watch? And I think most people would say that it probably isn't. So my thinking is always to sort of err on the side of caution to try and make sure that you have anybody who may have that sort of contact with a child on any sort of basis to make sure that they get that check done. It will give you a little bit, it makes it a little easier to sleep at night in terms of knowing that you have done everything you can to try and make sure that individuals and the children that are in your program are not being jeopardized in any particular way. Go to the next slide. There we go. So there's really three different things that we try to remember in all this when we're dealing with background checks. It's what I call the CCR. It's considerations, confirmation, and review. It's pretty simple in terms of trying to make sure that you've done it appropriately and checking on those backgrounds. After you've assessed everybody that needs to do that, we need to go through a 3 different step process with each one of those individuals. So when we first go to considerations, obviously Baltimore City requires that you can only do the background search after you've conditionally made an offer of employment, an offer for the individual to volunteer or be an intern, or for a subcontractor in the process. You need to wait until after that relationship has been established to a certain point. From Baltimore City requires that that's when you can then start doing the background search on the individual. Let's just pause here for a second and talk about subcontractors. Family League goes through a process that they try to make sure that all of their funded partners are doing background checks, and they have in their contracts that you're required to do that. You are required to upload information into Funding Track to make sure that you have done that. And obviously, I know we've seen some things with Clifton was pointing out that there's various different site visits that could take place, and they might look to go through all of your different list of volunteers or list of employees to make sure that you have done a background check on those individuals. You also have to consider that for your subcontractors. In my world, forgive me for saying this, I'm an inherent cynic. I trust no one. So if my subcontractor tells me, yeah, they did it, then I want to make sure that they did it in some fashion. I want to try and make sure that that has been done, because frankly, the consequences of that individual not happening of that background not being done, and the consequences of somebody doing something inappropriate, somebody doing something to a child, I don't want to know that that's happened under my watch. So we make sure that our subcontractors actually have done what they said they've done. We make them affirmatively tell us that, yes, they have done the background searches as well. Yes, we make them affirmatively state that I've done the monitoring, we're making sure we keep track of this, and we're making sure that it doesn't happen and that nothing occurs under our watch. We want to make sure that's there. So if you do end up using subcontractors, if you are getting money and you're bringing in a third party to try and make sure that they do this, you want to make sure that they go through the same process in doing background searches on all of their employees who are coming in contact with the children that are in your programs. The big thing with doing background search is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I know it sounds a little odd to talk about the Fair Credit Reporting Act in the sense of background searches, but the reality is federal law defines background searches as being a credit report. So because background searches are a credit report, it is something that ultimately the government says you have certain procedures that you have to go through so that you can make sure that the decision is appropriately handled and that it's appropriately done. First thing you do, obviously, when you have an individual who's going to come work for you, you do not let them work with children until you've done these steps, until you've gone through making sure that background check is done. In order to make sure that that background check is done, the first thing you do is you obviously tell the individual that you're going to have to do that background search, and you have them sign, separate from the application, a separate form that says they consent to this background check being done. They consent to the idea that you will be doing a national and a state check to verify that the individual has, in fact, no criminal history that may impact their employment or their volunteering or their internship with you in any fashion. Make sure that it's separate from the application. It's its own form that you can ultimately use. You're going to need date of birth, you're going to need social security number, and then you're going to obviously need the individual's legal name in that process. So you get written permission for it. That's sort of step one to making sure that you do that. You're going to need that ultimately when you go find a vendor. Trying to find a vendor, I'm going to give you the names of two different places in a little while, but you find a vendor that can do this. And the best way to do it is to find a vendor to make sure that vendor is doing not only state, but national check. And then also the best part is to make sure that they're doing annual or regular monitoring on it, so you don't have to go through it on an annual basis. If they're doing regular monitoring of it, basically what that means is that that individual, that company that does that, if it's flagged in any way, the person gets arrested for some sort of crime or anything else comes up in the record, it will automatically get forwarded to you so you can immediately pay attention to it and decide what it is that you need to do under that circumstances. So you have to verify that whatever vendor you use, that they have the authority to conduct the criminal background search. Easy enough to do, easy enough to find a company that says, yes, they can do that. They're going to need the name, address, social security number. Usually they're going to need date of birth as well. There are some common names out there. If there's a John Smith out there, it becomes a much bigger deal in terms of trying to figure out exactly what it is that they've done. So that's why they look for social security numbers. They're looking for date of birth so they can try and match it up appropriately. You need to make sure that the investigations are completed before the individual starts. That should pretty much be a no-brainer. but you want to make sure that you're done. Typically, criminal background checks can be done in a matter of days. It's not that difficult, but then you also need to make sure that they are submitted annually if they are not monitored on a consistent basis. I just want to pause here for a second about people who think, well, maybe I can save that money that I was going to spend on a background search. I can do it myself. I can go onto the Maryland Judiciary website. I can look, see if this individual has anything. I can also look on the sex offender registry, and I can see if this particular individual has been convicted of anything that they've had to register as a sex offense. They are not the best way to go. They are not the types of things that typically you see that will give you all of the information that you see, that you need in order to make this assessment. I can tell you, I look at the Judiciary Information website for a variety of reasons on a regular basis, and there is never enough detail in there to specifically give you exactly what you need. Not to mention, some of the information is dated. Some of the information has not been updated as quickly as we may want in the process. Hang on one second. There's a question here. We usually sent our volunteers employees CGIS for background. Just to be clear, that is no longer good enough because they only do state. Yes, you need to do state and national background searches. It's an obvious reason as to why. Pennsylvania is not far from here. Neither is DC, neither is Virginia, neither is Delaware. It's easy to go across those various state lines in order to do these things. Just to give you one sort of anecdotal example, Baltimore County, probably 3 or 4 years ago, finally implemented a process to make sure that there was monitoring for all of its youth sports programs. They had not imposed that on any volunteers, on any referees, coaches, any of that for any of their programs. They saw that once that happened, they lost about 20% of the coaches and volunteers that were with their programs no longer returned and suddenly went somewhere else. I'm not suggesting that any of those individuals definitely had any sort of criminal activity in their background, but it was very interesting to note that suddenly all those people didn't want those background searches to take place and ended up moving on to other jurisdictions potentially for providing the services. It's sort of an interesting tale in the whole process, which is why the reason that we make sure that it happens, because again, the reality is the consequences of this are so much greater than the little impact and the inconvenience of going through it up front. So after you have done the confirmation, the next thing that you need is basically you review the results. You get back a report. Hopefully it has nothing on it, which makes things easy. Sometimes it has very simple things on there that are simple. There might be a traffic offense on there that is of no consequence that you can pretty much ignore. For the most part, nobody cares about the traffic incidents or anything that's on there. There's a long list of offenses that we're going to take a look at in a second, but you have to be very careful and very cognizant of what it is that you're looking at. Keep in mind that you want to protect children. And I, again, being the inherent cynic and being an attorney who by very nature, I'm sort of on the conservative side. So what happens is if I see anything that is close, we're not really sure what it is. We're not really sure what the impact may be in an environment where you're dealing with youth. I would say, no, let's just pass on this particular individual. I know sometimes that's difficult because sometimes volunteers, employees are difficult to come by. But again, you got to weigh the consequences. Is it important to have this person in there versus what it may ultimately do? And we're not suggesting that anybody may have something in their past, may actually be an offender, but we just want to be very careful about it. The state requires it. Parents require that. I don't think any parent, if they found out about this, is the kind of thing that they would easily swallow, saying, holy cow, you knew this individual had a background and you still let them go around my children on a regular basis. That is a political nightmare, not to mention it can have all kinds of consequences. If you see any offense that you're not sure of, talk to your attorney or talk to Family League. They'll see what they can do to try and help you. There are a variety of different offenses that have code provisions with them that may mean absolutely nothing. They could have felony convictions and it may have absolutely nothing to do with youth. For example, the minute you drop a fraudulent tax return into a mailbox, that is a felony. And if you're convicted of that, you will have a felony conviction on you, although it may ultimately be the kind of thing that at the end of the day, it's like, they could probably work with kids. I don't know that that felony conviction is going to be a problem. But if you have any questions at the end of the day, you should definitely talk with Family League or your attorneys to try and make some more difficult decisions about what that means. So there's a bunch of things that you want to review for, and they're probably, for the most part, self-evident. Anything where there's child abuse, anything where there is some involvement, a confinement of an unattended child, if anything arises as a result of any family situation where you're dealing with someone who is an abused individual in any way, you want to be very careful that those individuals don't come into contact with you. If they're contributing to delinquency of a minor in any way, you want to be careful. If they're hiring or soliciting a minor in any way, those are also things that typically we look for in a flag, that they're the situations that we want to make sure that those individuals are not retained for these positions. Obviously, anything where there's incest, indecent exposure, kidnapping, maiming or mayhem, murder, pornography, rape, sex offenses, sodomy, unnatural perverted practices, religious or ethnic crimes are something that is frequently flagged as well by the federal government as something that they look at. And any other crimes involving children or vulnerable adults. These are situations that we typically flag. These are situations that we typically say, no, we love you, but we don't want you here. It's one of the situations that's just too high of a risk in the process that we don't want to bring them involved with everything. Okay, wait a minute. There's another question. I apologize. You answer my question. Okay. So the question in the chat room is a question of we don't always, our partners do background checks. They do not always give them to us, but rather a contract with them, have them sign that they have them on their files, just as you are asking us to have them on our files. Is this okay? Here's the best way that I can explain the situation. If anybody out there has raised teenagers, and I've raised quite a few, you tell me whether you will believe that if they've actually done something, and you've asked them if they've done that, how many of those teenagers will actually admit to the fact that they've done it? So the problem that we end up having in all these situations, I don't really trust anybody, and we always ask to sort of do a check. So like what I know Clinton was identifying, that the Family League is going to go out and do those on-site checks. They're going to look to see if you have your background checks. They're going to look to see what's there. You're going to have a collection of them. You're going to say, yes, we've done these background checks. I've actually done that. The same thing should happen with your partners, with some of your subcontractors in the process. They may say they have them. The question is, can you at least show me that you actually have them? Just trusting someone has them is not always the best thing. Again, at the end of the day, this is the way we've got to look at it. It's sad to say this. Not only am I trying to protect children, but I'm trying to protect you. And in the process, we live in a very litigious society. I don't know that anybody is going to disagree with that. But if I end up having a problem where for some reason a child has in some way been impacted, the family's attorney, Family League, the state, everybody's going to come to me and say, what did you do to make sure that this particular individual did not come in contact with a child? Or did you know that there was any problem that this may happen? And the first thing you want to do is say, you know what, here's what we've got. We've done a background check. We've got it in the file. It's current. It's constantly monitoring things. We're making sure that we don't have any problems in that process. There's nothing that you could have done to try and make sure that this particular situation would not have occurred. Because of that, just somebody saying, yes, we have them is often not enough. You might want to do a little bit more to try and protect yourself, to try and protect the child, and to try and protect against the idea that if somebody ever looked at you, will they criticize to say you did not do everything you could have in order to make sure that situation was appropriately handled in the process. Oh, man, things are flying here. Background searches, you're not allowed to show them to someone else. The real question ends up becoming a question of what it is in that background search. Most background searches are the only thing that they're going to disclose about are criminal convictions in the process, and that is all public information. You can obtain it through a FOIA. You can obtain that information through a Public Information Act request. You can obtain that in a variety of different ways. And if that is public information, then certainly you can share that with the company, with your funded, with Family League, with anybody along those lines. The reality is I'm not saying that you actually have to see a copy of the background check. I want you to make sure you force someone to affirmatively state to you that they verify that they have it and they understand the consequences if they don't do it. Because I can tell you right now that if one of those situations arises, if any of my clients have asked any of their subcontractors for a background search, and that subcontractor says, oh, sorry, we thought we did it, but we didn't have it, and unfortunately this child was impacted, everything is going to be pointing towards that subcontractor in the process. And that subcontractor needs to understand the weight of all that and what that's going to mean, not only to the family and the child, but also to its potential future in terms of how that will be reflected on future opportunities that they have to work with youth in the process. Oop, hang on. I don't know whether I jumped or you jumped. All right. Trying to go here. I get control and then I lose control. Let me see. All right. Got one more here. Whoop, too far. So hang on for a second. Let me go. It looks like part of the slides are lost. So let me just talk about some of the other things in here. One of the first things you do if you get a criminal background check back, or you get, and it has some negative information on it, hopefully at that point in time, the individual that you had involved is not actually working on the contract, is not providing any services in the process. In the event that you have regular monitoring done of the program, of the background searches, and something comes back, there's a flag that suddenly something has arisen in the system and they've let you know that there's an individual here who is currently in contact with children that probably should be removed. The first thing you need to do while you're trying to assess everything is remove that individual from the situation where they are actually still in contact with the child. You want to immediately remove them from that situation so you can avoid any further problems that may or may not occur. It's not to say that anything has occurred, but you want to protect yourself in the process and protect the children at the end of the day in the process until you come up with the situation to try and figure out exactly what's going on. The other thing that you need to do, if for any reason there is negative information that you decide that you need to take action, whether it's refuse to hire or employ a person, or whether it's that you decide that you have to terminate an individual because of something that popped up, you are required to give them notice. And the notice basically, there's forms the FTC puts out on a regular basis. There's standard forms that you give to say that we have to separate from you, we have to terminate, or we cannot hire you for some reason, and it's because of something in your background check. You give them a copy of the background report, and then ultimately there's another notice that you have to give them about the rights that they have in checking into that further with the various different credit bureaus, with any different background searches that have a situation. You have to give them that notice to protect yourself against any liability from under the Federal Credit Reporting Act. So it is something that's required, not necessarily to protect you in this situation, but it is a legal requirement that you ultimately have to go through. Those forms are easily found. Your HR department, if you have one, shouldn't have them, but they're easily found on the internet. The FTC puts out a link with the different forms that you can give to people in the event that they leave. The one thing you have to keep in mind, obviously, you've got to make sure that you monitor these in some ways. Typically, there's two different reporting outfits that will go through the process of regularly flagging and providing you with additional information in the event there is anything that comes up after you've already employed this individual. Those two organizations, one is CJIS, and the other one is Pinkerton, and they will do regular monitoring. So if anything happens while the individual is still employed, it flags, it sends it to you so you can take appropriate action as is necessary. Otherwise, Family League requires you to go through an annual certification to make sure that this individual who has not been monitored ultimately continues to be checked in the process and that they are still appropriate for working in this particular program. Other than that, let me just make sure I've got all the questions answered. Yes, and that's accurate. Yes, when the person signs off at the beginning of the employment or beginning of the relationship where they're coming to work with you, yes, they are signing off and saying that you do have the permission to pull this information. You have the legal right to have that information and to make sure you do something appropriately with it. Other than that, I don't know if there are any additional questions. Feel free to throw them in there if you can. Oh, the background check. I will make sure we write the names in there. I'll make sure that I provide that with you. Not a problem.
Rachel, I think there was a question for comms. It was, as it relates to media releases, if we have the news coming on site to do a story about our Family League funded program, do we need to get permission from Family League first? How would that work? Just want to be clear. Thanks.
Yes, I was going to jump in and share that. And then we have one other question from Lachelle Stewart that we also need to answer after this. So no, you don't need to get permission from Family League to have media on site regarding regarding a Family League funded program. However, we do ask that you give us a heads up that that activity is going to happen. So if you can give us kind of a heads up so that we know to potentially look for that in the media, we can do so. But you don't have to. It's more so if you yourself are generating a press release or anything along those lines, that you share that information, that you share that press release or that media advisory with us prior to sending it out to the media. There's two questions from Lachelle Stewart. So the first was a contracts question, and I'll share that. It says, who do we contact if we have our contract for this fiscal year but have not gotten any disbursements? That's her first question. And then once that question's answered, we can share her second one.
Michelle, you can send an email to your partnership manager and also Nisa Moses, and we can work together to get you the information you need.
And then her second question is related specifically to background checks. It says, can you share information about the automatic background checks with CJIS? We currently schedule them annually.
Which is appropriate. That's what I'm looking real quick to pull up. Somebody asked me to put the sites in the chat, and I'll make sure I put the sites that we're going to be using for that in the chat so everybody can see what the links are for where that is they need to go.
Currently, there's no other questions. So, Dewana, if you want to wrap us up.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. We want to thank all of you so much for attending today's session. Our goal, of course, was to provide you with a thorough overview of the critical components so that you can be successful in our partnership through our communications, finance, grants and contracts, and our legal lens as well. I want to thank our President and CEO, Demaune Millard, for taking time out of his busy and demanding schedule, to join us and provide us with an overview of the mission, vision, and all of the exciting and upcoming partnerships and opportunities for the year. We greatly appreciate and value his leadership and guidance in continuing to grow our organization. I also want to thank you all for all of the other presenters as well, who are extremely vital to the administration of the work that we do. I do want to again share our email address, which is fundedpartnerships@familyleague.org, so that you may forward any questions or requests for information that you may have. Do not hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be glad to hear from you. Also, if you have any questions on our grants management system, which is Funding Track, you can email those questions to fundingtrack@familyleague.zendesk.com. Also, a training on Funding Track will be provided during our session, which is on the last day, Thursday, September 24th. That day is designated for Funding Track training and overview, so we encourage you to be sure to attend that day as well. As a reminder, these virtual sessions are being recorded and will be made available to you, each of you, via email by close of business each day. And also, all sessions will be made available on our website on Friday, September the 25th. We are looking forward to you all joining us on tomorrow, where we will be joined by the programs team, who will be sharing detailed information about our dynamic programs and professional development opportunities to help strengthen your organizations even further. We very much appreciate your partnership and are extremely invested in your success. So we are looking forward to seeing you on tomorrow. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
Have a good day, everyone.